Teddy Prochazka is out, and Nebraska is one injury at offensive tackle away from, well, panic. We talk about it coming up.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply.
All right, good morning and welcome to a Wednesday show. Connor Happer here from 1620 The Zone in Omaha. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Tuesday turned out to be a bit of an eventful day in not all bad ways, but certainly a significant one. So we'll talk about that right off the top here with Teddy Prochazka. We just talked about the tackle spot and battles, position battles yesterday, and we're like, well,
we shouldn't have done that.
Interesting that Turner Corcoran, ran out there with the first group at the open practice, and that was when Teddy was, was still healthy enough, and now he is not. He tore his ACL. He'll be out for the season yet again in his career, so hasn't been able to put health really together at all in his college career. And as you mentioned in the cold open there, Mitch, you're always one injury away from like, ooh, I don't know if I like this situation here. Where do you think Nebraska is at right now? Like, where does this put the kind of energy? It's certainly a buzzkill. Like, you want to have a smooth camp going into the season, and to have a left tackle injury right out of the gates is, whichever way you want to put it for Nebraska, it's not good.
There have been some years where Nebraska's gotten all the way toward the end of camp without anything serious happening health-wise, and fourth practice, you lose a freshman defensive back, linebacker. Roger Gradney went down with what we learned also on Tuesday was an ACL. That was an injury on Saturday night in the open practice. And then the big one, of course, with Teddy Prochazka, third season ender in 4 years for the junior out of Elkhorn South. So it is a buzzkill. And, I got the sense that even talking to the defensive players on Tuesday about this, that, everybody feels for Teddy, and everybody's just kind of got the wind knocked out of them when this happened. Matt Rule was not scheduled to come into the media room on Tuesday, but he dropped in at the beginning before Terrance Knighton and John Butler took the stage just to break the news, give everybody the official word that Prochazka was out for the year. And Rule mentioned that, Teddy epitomizes what they're looking for in a teammate, and that immediately when this happened, it was what's next with him. And on Monday night, just a few hours after the injury, he was in the team meeting, helping out, trying to get his teammates ready. So that's great. You like to see that attitude, but where's Nebraska at now in terms of depth at offensive tackle?
Yeah. You gotta, it's, next guy up is you say that all the time. Coaches say that all the time. And Nebraska is fortunate, I think, to have, a guy kind of sitting around who I think they'd like to play at, guard or have as kind of their sixth offensive lineman in Turner Corcoran, who could kind of slot into that left tackle spot, but it's a really important spot. And then you think about what's behind him and you're like, okay, we're down to some young guys. Gunnar Gatula is probably the next tackle, right? As far as how you look at it there, like he's probably the next tackle behind Ben Hart and Corcoran, left and right and left tackle respectively. And then you have Tyler Canuck, guys like Jacob Hood. Can Grant Bricks make his way into that conversation? He of taco eating fame. Can he jump into that mix already? It's like it becomes pretty open. So it's an opportunity for somebody else to kind of come through and say that they're the number two guy and they're the backup if something happens to one of those top ones. But it's definitely way less. It's way more murky than it was 24 hours ago.
I forgot about the taco eating fest that freshman Grant Brix embarked on.
He put on
in
his
the
own
offseason.
taco eating fest. Yeah.
Yeah. He gained 25 pounds from the weight that he was listed at when he signed with Nebraska, went from 285. He's now listed at 310. And I think part of the reason that people were skeptical about Grant Brix being ready to play as a true freshman, he was, other than Dylan Raiola and Carter Nelson, I mean, right with Carter Nelson, Grant Brix was there, like the highest level recruit that Nebraska signed in this 24 class. But like Nelson, he played a very low level of high school football, just small class high school football in Iowa, and didn't get trained in pass protection. It was knock the guy over in front of you and watch your running back go a long way, or your quarterback. So everything where Grant Brix had to be like back on his heels and making sure his quarterback didn't take a hit, that was all new to him in the spring. He does have that semester under his belt, but I think they have to stick to the plan. Like, unless there's just a couple of more injuries at offensive tackle here, and that could happen. I mean, it's only August 7th. So if you get to a place in October where they keep going down, I mean, yes, you're looking at playing 310, 315, maybe at that time, pound freshman Grant Brix. So get ready, young fella. But before that, it's Gatula, it's Tyler Kanak, it's Jacob Hood, who's had all kinds of injury issues himself before and after transferring from Georgia. And then you look at a guy like Grant Segrin, who is a walk-on redshirt freshman, but is probably at the top of that class other than Gatula in terms of the offensive lineman. Maybe Sam Sledge is up there too, but he's an interior guy. Segrin, they really like. He put on a ton of weight, like good weight, not taco weight. And I don't think Brix didn't gain 25 pounds. He gained that from hitting the weights.
Yeah.
Talked to some defensive players about that, about how they gained all this weight in the offseason too, but different story. Grant Segrin maybe would be a guy that Nebraska could get down to and looking at for real time at offensive tackle. It's getting kind of scary already.
They have it just feels like, we're going through all these guys at offensive line. We talked about it a lot over the last two podcasts here, but they have seemingly a lot to survive in interior offensive lineman spots, and maybe way less. I mean, not maybe, definitely way less in the tackle spots. So, well, you have Ben Hart and you have Corcoran, who's, like I said, ideally not a tackle in the first place. And then Prochazka, who goes down with an injury, and then you're like, oh, kind of looking around. We got to develop some guys, and it's got to happen fast.
Yeah, Donovan Raiola has got his work cut out for him. If they could get David Sanders to reclassify, like right now, I don't know if he's able to graduate and commit to Nebraska on August 17th. In a week. Yeah. And then, I mean, it's 2 weeks. He's committing 2 weeks before the opener. So if he can reclassify, commit, sign, learn the offense, and get up to speed, then he might be. I think they would take him. Now, look. If Nebraska can get David Sanders, then it's going to be set at left tackle for years to come. But that's not going to help out in 2024.
No, and they've changed. They've turned a lot of they recruit offensive linemen, and then they're here for a spring, or maybe they early enroll. They're here for a spring. They're here for a summer, and they show back up in the fall, and you're like, oh yeah, they're defensive linemen now. They're on the defensive ball, and it's happened, I guess, in a couple instances the other way around too. Not an offensive lineman here, but one thing that we haven't talked about is Ishmael Smith Flores, who was a tight end, and he moved over to the linebacker spot, and he just kind of popped up there. They're like, yeah, we're going to give it a shot. And we're going to see what happens. So I don't know, maybe there's somebody on that defensive line, which has a plethora of depth that they could, flip over. Probably not ready for playing time, real life playing time, but could provide a little bit of depth. I don't know how they feel about that, but just kind of throwing stuff against the wall at this point. Yeah, it's thin at those tackle spots.
Dylan Parrot was an offensive lineman, another guy that they liked, similar to Grant Segrin, a year older, and they moved him to defense. He's probably not coming back as a result of this. And if he does, you can't necessarily expect him to be somebody that's going to help you out in that spot. They're going to need to get quality reps from Gatula and Tyler Kanak and maybe Jacob Hood, and just hope that Turner Corcoran, who's had injury issues of his own in the last couple of years, had a knee, missed the last 5 games last season, and really fought to come back. So who'd have thought a week into camp, guy in the spotlight is going to be Turner Corcoran? Like the most significant development has put him right in the limelight. And Matt Rule did confirm also today that Turner got his ankle stepped on at practice. I saw that happen at practice on Saturday night. And, he came over to the sideline and just slammed his helmet into the ground. So it hurt. He wasn't happy. I think he was mainly just mad that he had to come out, and he's in this competition at that moment with Teddy, and he had to come out and give Teddy his reps with the ones. So Turner was in a yellow jersey, like not running full speed early this week with the ones. And I know Gatula was out there at left tackle. So we'll see. We're going to get a glimpse of practice on Friday. And I imagine that like everybody, when they walk in, are going to walk straight to the offensive line and just get a look at what's going on at that left tackle spot.
Yeah. And then there's that, there's the perception piece of it, which we kind of touched on at the beginning. Like, the news headline comes across, Nebraska lost their starting left tackle in the first week of camp. That's a tough one to swallow. You look at it not only for what it does to your team, and the vibe that it kind of sends there, but also the kind of perception of it as well. So we'll see if Nebraska has the depth to make up for any of that. But like we said, it's pretty thin. So not a great start. Hopefully for them, that's the only one throughout camp where you're like, okay, that's a starter or a starter caliber guy. He's in the top 20. He was in our top 10. Where did he come in, Mitch? Like number 9? 6?
He was he was somewhere up there.
He was in our top 10 of the most important guys, and so to lose one of those guys right off the bat is it's not.
So was Tristan Alvano.
So was Tristan Alvano, who's working his way back as well. All right, we will take a timeout. We'll come back. Got an introduction to John Butler, Nebraska's new secondary coach, yesterday after practice. Some stuff from him and a couple little nuggets from Coach Pot Roast. One in particular that people might be interested in. We'll be back with that when we return. But a reminder, please subscribe and follow on Twitter at LockedOnNEB. You can tweet at us questions, thoughts, concerns from there. You can email us as well, LockedOnNEB@gmail.com, in case Mitch has to do a solo episode again and has to deploy the old mailbag button. Please send us your questions and thoughts at LockedOnNEB@gmail.com. We'll be back after this.
I'm ready. I'm ready. Whenever that baby girl starts crying, you just fire me up. I'm going solo. We're coming back. All right, Mitch Sherman here for Game Time. It is coming up on college football season, as you can tell from what's happening here on our podcast. Also, the pennant races are almost, maybe they are, in full swing. It's August. I think you can say they're in full swing.
Full swing.
So it's time to get excited about sports. And if you've got a game that you'd like to see in person, Game Time is here to make that experience much easier. It is an authorized ticket marketplace of MLB. Game Time makes getting tickets faster and easier. You've got a game you want to go check out, hop on the app, prices go down the closer you get to first pitch. So whatever you want to do for the rest of the summer and into the fall, if it's concerts, if it's baseball, if it's college football, whatever is going on, basketball is going to get going. If it's a hot ticket, it's there on Game Time. I love that you can see views from your seat. You can customize your spot in the stadium. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Game Time, last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, welcome back on this Monday. Mitch Sherman of The Athletic here with Connor Happer of Omaha's 1620 The Zone. Connor, you're still off work from the 4-hour show. How was your Tuesday?
It's good. It's definitely different than
different pace.
Different pace. There's a lot of times of just kind of sitting around and waiting, but I get to take in all the things that I got to take in an interesting day on social media with a vice presidential candidate. Mitch, do you have any more insight on this? People that you might have talked to on Tuesday that threw your day in a different direction?
Well, we're certainly not going anywhere political on this podcast. I can assure you of that. So that's the disclaimer here at the start of this discussion. But I did find myself on the phone on Tuesday with people who played and coached football in Alliance, Nebraska in the early 1990s. This is because some of the bosses above me at the Athletic and stretching up to the New York Times want to hear more about Tim Walz, the vice presidential candidate who grew up in Nebraska and coached high school football in the state of Nebraska. So who would have thought that when I woke up on Tuesday morning, I was going to be talking about the again, the presidential vice presidential candidate in a major political party. I mean, I guess we kind of knew, but it really wasn't on my work radar. So that was fun.
If you would have said somebody who's currently, back in the 90s, or somebody who's currently coaching high school football is going to be a vice presidential candidate one day,
Chuck
who would you have
Mazursky.
said? It's like, I don't know, like
Fred Petito.
Yeah, I don't think he got in there, sadly. So Tim Walz.
Right. And if you're coaching high school football in the state of Nebraska, we might have the odds that you were representing the other political party might have been slightly higher than the direction that it fell for
a little bit.
Tim Walz. Yeah, I mean, Nebraska is a small community, the whole state, all 1.8 million people. It's a small community. And I found myself talking to people on Tuesday as I tried to dig up some insight on what this guy was like as a football coach on the phone with people who go way back in my past. And it was a windy road that I'll tell you about someday over a beer or in a different podcast. But, back to the real world or our real world here in football, we got to talk to, as you mentioned, on the at the end of the first segment, Terrance Knighton, John Butler. We heard from MJ Sherman, Cam Lenhart, Sean Singleton, and Malcolm Hartzog. So it was a busy day at the Hawks Championship Center. That's a little more in line with who I expect to talk to on a Tuesday in August. So Knighton, I want to start there. Expects his group to be good. I asked him because I wondered about this aloud in the Monday or the Tuesday pod, if he might play Jamari Butler and Cam Lenhart at the same time. Both these guys, 260 pounds. I got to talk to Cam a little bit about how they gained that weight. And so that was an interesting conversation about just eating healthy. And the guys encourage each other to, take an extra snack from the training table. As you might expect, Knighton said yes. Those two guys are both going to get on the field at the same time when they're 260 pounds as opposed to 245, 250. Nebraska's going to find ways to play them all over the defensive line. So kind of excited to see that. And then somebody asked about Kona Davis, and Knighton brought up that he was 270. He's listed at 255 on the roster. So I don't know. This guy's legend is just growing and growing in his first week of camp. And then Coach Knighton threw in that by the time he leaves Nebraska, he's going to be looking like somebody who used to play here and wore number 93.
Interesting. So yes, the legend grows even more. There was a story, and Mitch, you'll have to remind me. I don't know if it was The Athletic or maybe it was ESPN. They did a story over the summer, a few weeks back about I think it was Max, friend of the show, Max Olson. He did a sequential order of all of the dominoes to fall after Nick Saban retires.
Yeah.
So Nick Saban retires and Kalen DeBoer goes to Alabama and Jed Fish goes to Washington. Here's another domino. Nebraska ends up with the next Ndamukong Suh. I mean, that's a pretty big deal.
That is a great point. That was one of Max's big projects over the summer before he departed The Athletic to go to ESPN. So you're kind of correct in that it was The Athletic, but hey, it's Max Olson of ESPN. Yeah. Super interesting story. And he's done a couple of those, he did one last year. I think it was the Lincoln Riley departure and just all of the domino effects in coaching that had when Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma to go to USC, maybe it was Brian Kelly going from Notre Dame to LSU. I don't remember. They're all so entertaining and interesting, and it gets down to some junior varsity high school coach who got a new job because Nick Saban retired. So yeah, Kona Davis is here at Nebraska because Nick Saban got fed up with the way of college football.
like I've seen some pictures. I haven't got the chance to see Kona Davis up close yet, but in seeing pictures, like he has this rare, especially for a defensive lineman, and you could see why he gets the comp to sue. It's because he's able, like he has such a large frame, but he's able to throw all this weight on. Yeah, he's got really long arms and certainly can move athletically as well. What an intriguing, kind of, guy there on the defensive line that Nebraska, he probably ends up at Washington if everything stays the same last offseason. So that'll be a really interesting one to follow. And yeah, not tampering expectations, I guess a little bit. Look like and play like Ndamukong Suh is different things, but at the same time, I don't think that we've seen a whole lot of guys that have come through Nebraska that have looked like Ndamukong Suh. So you kind of take note of that.
Not really. No, there haven't been a ton of those guys. Randy Gregory, he didn't look like Ndamukong Suh, but you could say he looked like Randy Gregory. If there was a guy who came into the program now and looked like that, you talk about long arms and just like freakishly athletic. Bruce Feldman, by the way, of The Athletic, great college football writer. He's out with his freaks list, which is again always just such a hugely entertaining read. I would recommend everyone go check that out. And Nebraska's not getting a bunch of guys on the freaks list, but Bruce did message me on Tuesday and let me know that he talked to Matt Rule for this piece, and Rule mentioned a couple of guys. He tried to pull for a couple of his guys to get on there, and he talked up Tommy Hill, who is 205 pounds and still playing corner like 175 pounder, and then he interestingly, Rule talked about Vince Genatone. So Vince Genatone is the Montana transfer from North Platte High School, who was state champion sprinter and I believe a wrestler. Yeah. And he's like 225, 230 pounds now. Look, I mean, I'm not debating whether he deserves to be considered a freak, and that's like all positive connotation. Like he is an athletic freak. But Genatone played 2 years, or he spent 2 years at Montana and didn't really get on the field. So he's at Nebraska now as a linebacker, and we're not gonna say All-American or anything like that. Let's get him on the field and get him some snaps first.
So the next step for Davis would be, if he's to make it on a Bruce Feldman freaks list, maybe next year or whatever,
no doubt,
we get the anecdotes. This guy did this somehow. He somehow pushed an entire train car over by himself, like whatever it might be.
That's where you go to get that information, is from Bruce's freaks list. So
you need the anecdotes. Right. So we'll keep an eye on that one. Coming up, we'll talk about John Butler, who spoke with the media and looked polished, and we'll talk about a little bit how Nebraska has turned out in Matt Rule's kind of first spin around the coaching carousel, assistant coaching carousel, and the guys that he's ended up with. We'll do that on the other side. But first, a quick thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen of the day. For your second listen, you need more college football coverage, head to Locked On College Football, the podcast from the Locked On Podcast Network. Drop in on any of the summer discussions. Then, of course, as we get into college football season, it'll gear more toward football as well. Locked On College Football available on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, just like here, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so anecdote, John Butler living out of a hotel. How many times? We're going to be hitting at about a 35% rate here. Assistant coaches who get here and they're like, yeah, I'm trying to buy a house, but camp's here and I can't really get around to that yet. So I'm going to live out of the hotel this year and we'll figure it out. So there's that one on John Butler.
It's a common thing. Coaches have lived out of hotels for long periods of time. It was Mike Riley lived out of the Embassy Suites downtown for like 2 years or something like that. Like he moved into his house and they had to move out because there was something wrong with the paint. His wife was allergic to it, and so yeah. I mean, Butler's got a long. He hasn't even been in Lincoln for barely a month, or right at not even a month. He's got many months to go to even even get close to the record. But that's where he is. He's no car is necessary. Walks over from his downtown hotel and goes to work. And, he mentioned that he's been around the Nebraska program at times in his career. He coached at Texas in that he may not have wanted to admit that in front of the cameras at Nebraska, but he did. He coached at Texas in the late 90s, I think, and made a trip to Nebraska. Maybe he was here for that 98 game with Ricky Williams, which is not a fond memory for Nebraska, but I have to double check on that and talk to Butler about that visit. And then he was at Penn State for a couple years and made a trip to Nebraska. So he's familiar with the landscape, but had never, of course, been up close and inside. And even if he had during those visits, it's all different now with the Osborne Legacy Complex and everywhere the football program is housed. So he's very impressed. And, coming from the NFL, the way Nebraska is structured, the way the coaching staff is structured now, and having like an assistant secondary coach who coaches the corners, an assistant secondary coach who coaches the safeties, and then Butler can like preside over the whole thing, and then Tony White can be up here and preside over him. It's like pro football, so it's really not much of an adjustment for the new secondary coach.
So I'm looking just a quick Google here. So he was a GA at Texas in 97 and 98.
Yes.
And so 98, they would have came to Lincoln, won it. Texas won 20-16.
Yeah, that was Ricky Williams.
That was the Ricky Williams game. Yeah.
He won the Heisman that year.
Yeah. 37 carries for 150 yards for Ricky Williams that day.
So this was very early in the Big 12 years, and Texas had like stomped on Nebraska's hearts 2 years before that in St. Louis at the first Big 12 championship game, denying Nebraska what would have been 4 national championship game appearances in 4 years. But Nebraska fans hadn't truly learned to hate Texas in the way that they did a decade later. So when Mac Brown and Ricky Williams came into Lincoln on that day in 1998, Nebraska was still kind of on top of the college football world. It was the defending national champions. This was Frank Solich's first year. And, it's not like Ricky ran for 350 yards, like 37 carries for 150. Like that's some tough yardage. Yep. And I do recall that he got a major ovation. Like this was Nebraska fans who, again, they were living the life. And despite 98 being a tough season, they appreciated what greatness they saw in Ricky Williams that day and serenaded him like with real praise as he was leaving the field. And the Texas people, they were amazed because, they're used to going to Oklahoma. Well, they didn't play on the road at Oklahoma, but they're used to going to, into Texas A&M at that time, or Texas Tech, and, just like having cups of beer thrown on them or pee or whatever it is. And they encountered none of that with Ricky Williams on that day.
Okay. Not to go too far down, but I'm going to read the lead here on this recap. This is from Husker Max, who has put all these, all the articles together from all these games. So this is Halloween 98. Wayne McGarrity's 2-yard touchdown reception with 2:47 remaining capped an 85-yard drive and lifted unranked Texas to a 20-16 victory over number 7 Nebraska. The loss ended Nebraska's 47-game home winning streak, the 5th longest in NCAA history. And that's when it really began, like you said. So he was so John Butler anyway was there he was a GA.
Gosh, I wish I would have known that before we talked to him today. Man, that really would have been. I should have looked harder.
What do you remember about that game, man? That would have.
He brought it up. He brought it up and talking about his knowledge of Nebraska. So
really polished. I mean, like as you would expect for a guy who's spent a lot of time in the NFL, and seems to be adjusting pretty well. Like there's always that concern with NFL guys, like when they come in. How they're going to fit in, what are they going to be like from a recruiting standpoint? Seems to have, taken it and ran with it. And then, as I mentioned in the tease from the previous segment, like Matt Rules had to fill a couple coaching spots, and 2 primary assistant coaching spots. And he got Glenn Thomas, the quarterback's coach from the Steelers. And then, John Butler, the secondary coach from the Bills. So they've pulled from the NFL a little bit, but those are pretty accomplished guys with some resumes who have worked for and with good players and good coaches. So, I mean, Those are two pretty intriguing additions to the staff, and they'll make a difference this year.
Yeah, and hearing from the DBs that we've talked to here in the month of August and back in July, those guys to a man, and they'll say what I think you would expect that they say, but you can get a read. And these guys, I think they really appreciate the fact that Matt Rule, he didn't take the easy route. He didn't say, look, we had a departure in July, so we're going to make do for a year with someone who is inexperienced and coach the DBs, or, move another coach there who was a GA or something like that. I mean, that's a lot of times that's what you'd be left with. And he probably went and found the most accomplished secondary coach in America who was available. It's somewhat amazing that John Butler was out there in a position to fit in this job, and he was available. I mean, Butler said that he was beyond surprised to hear from Matt Rule, whether it was the first week of July or the end of June, whenever this thing became apparent that they were not going to move forward with Evan Cooper. And he said that it was surprise would be an understatement on how he felt about the opportunity. He thought once he got past February and March that this was going to have to be a year off for him, and he would get picked up by somebody in the NFL or in college in the next hiring cycle. So a win for him and a win for Nebraska to be able to do a great service to, what is an old and experienced secondary in Isaac Gifford, Marquise Buford, Tommy Hill. All of these guys are likely in their last year running around in the Nebraska defensive backfield. And Deshaun Singleton might be too. He played in 5 games last season, just started the 5th game when he suffered the season-ending injury. And Nebraska has submitted a waiver to try to get Singleton another year, but that 4-game rule is pretty hard and fast. And we'll see if this is his senior year or if he's got one more to play.
Yeah, it's another spot in the defensive secondary. Just, you're counting. I mean, just looking at the way the scholarships are distributed right now, you got, Tommy Hill and Deshaun Singleton and Buford are old guys, and Gifford is an old guy. And, Hartzog is getting up there as well. He's been around for a few years. Bly Hill is new and still has a few years left of eligibility. And then you're really going to be leaning on just your development track. I mean, there are it seems like there's 50, freshman defensive backs in that room. So you're going to be counting on, probably 3 or 4 of those guys to give you something this year.
I think there's 26 defensive backs on the 120. I've got that out today on The Athletic, the close or perhaps exact 120. This is a fluid thing, the 120, and Nebraska can replace Teddy Prochazka. So we're somewhat uncertain about maybe 1 or 2 spots on the 120 and where it's at. But I tried to get it as close as I could based on seeing everyone at practice on Saturday and then the interviews that we get. And there's I counted 26 defensive backs out of the 120. Wow. So yeah, you're right. It is the largest number of any position group on the team that's represented in camp.
All right, that's going to do it for us today. We'll be back with you tomorrow, Friday. We're rolling here every day as we gear up for the season. But one final thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. Go check out Locked On College Football now that you're done with us. You can find it pretty much the same place. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. If you want big picture college football talk, they got you covered. Spencer McLaughlin's got you covered over there. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.